we've kind of put the questions in sort of some key areas, and surprise, surprise, the first one is the budget. Yeah, it's the budget. It's on everybody's mind. So there have been a number of questions on the budget, and let me address the answers to those questions by giving you some of the items that are responses, and we'll see whether I get at least to address those of you who will know that this was the answer to your question. So first of all, the budget passed. This is the university's budget. In March, the board passed the budget for 2011-2012. And of course, we have just begun our fiscal year. So let me make some of the key points around the budget. The provincial government operating grant remained at the same level as last year. So that's a 0% increase. I never thought that I would actually be cheerful about a 0% increase. But in these difficult times, we were very worried that a 0% was not really a 0%, that there may be some items that would get taken away. Pleased to report that the entire grant is part of our grant this year, and so the expectations we had going in terms of our budget at least were met. Second one was lights on funding. That was a worry, because it was possible that they would say, your grant has not been increased, it's 0%, oh, but by the way, we're not providing you lights on for this building, as well as Edmonton Clinic, and they added that to the budget, and that's an additional $12 million over and above the base grant. Now, in terms of a few other items with respect to the questions, there is a modest surplus in the consolidated budget of 1.9 million, and this is a consolidated budget of well over $1 billion. This is both operating budget and all of the other budgets. We are required by law to run a surplus, or at least to balance our consolidated budget. We are not allowed to approve a budget, the board is not allowed to approve a budget with a negative or a deficit in the consolidated budget, and so there is a small surplus of 1.9 million. There is a modest, we projected a modest deficit in the operating budget and ended up with a modest surplus at the end of the year of 4.9 million. Now, the 60% of the operating budget is devoted to salaries and benefits. And the outcome of negotiations, which have not been concluded, could likely change the picture. So we still don't know what the final dispensation would be of our operating budget for 11-12 until we complete negotiations. And so in order for us to be responsible, we decided to move forward because the fiscal year has begun, and at this time the deans, the chairs, directors, vice presidents, everyone has been told to plan for a reduction of 2% across the board, and we will be looking at subsequently adjusting that 2% based on what happens with negotiations, and also based on some of the indicators that the provost's office has discussed with the deans. So there may be some adjustment depending on some of those factors, but for all intents and purposes, it is a 2% cut. Now, for those who don't know, the board and AASUA have moved to final decision arbitration. We could not reach an agreement, and both sides tried. Tremendous amount of effort went into it, but we could not agree. And so the next step, of course, is what is called a final offer selection in order to conclude negotiations. So that process is moving forward, and from everything that we understand, likely at the end of June. I see Drew over there, right? Is that about the right time frame? Now, let me also say a few words about last year's budget, which ended in March 31st, and I had a couple of questions about last year's budget. And that is about the forecasted surplus of $11 million in the budget, which amounted to about 1.5% for 2010-2011. So this is the final outcome at the end of the year. Now you might say, surplus. In fact, this is one of the questions. Well, how did you end up with a surplus when you projected for a deficit? There are two main reasons for the surplus, and it's really important you understand it, because one could question about the 2% cut going forward if indeed we have a surplus, or you might have other questions you might raise. The first reason for the surplus is a re-evaluation of our assets. This improvement in the value of our assets is due to the improving economy. And as the economy continues to improve, we might see additional gains of this type. However, this has not led to an increase in the university's income. So let me give you a kind of analogy. It's similar to the value of your house. Your house increases in value, well, that's good news, but you don't have access to that extra value in order to operate your household budget. But from an accounting standpoint, you have to report that increase in value. So that was the first item, and that particular asset will likely continue to appreciate, and we will not be able to liquidate that asset and convert it or monetize it until 2017, when we hope it will reach maturity. So because this, the second reason for the surplus is also an improvement on paper with no real dollar gain. The charge to the university for our pension obligation was less than we expected, again due to the improving economy. We still have to make the same payments to the plan, even though we are now overall in a better position. So that was the second reason for the surplus. It looks positive on paper, but in terms of our operations, retroactively or looking forward, there's not a lot we can do about the fact that we have on paper $11 million more from these two items. So what it means then is that the decisions and the actions we took last year, the furlough days, the 5% reduction were necessary, just as the projected reduction of 2% in next year's budget. So I want to make sure that there is no misconception with respect to how we had budgeted, the decisions, which were very difficult decisions. I know everyone in this room had to make a sacrifice, and that those decisions still stand as wise decisions, because we were able to minimize the loss of jobs in the last year, and retrospectively, in spite of the changes in our position, financial position, they were the right decisions that we made.